What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 12 defense rankings for week 8 of the NFL season. If you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. If you haven't checked out the running back, wide receiver rankings, those are already posted. But let's just dive right into tier 1 here. And my number one defense this week is going to be the Steelers taking on the Giants. I do think this is a really strong week for defenses. A lot of solid plays out there. No teams on bye, so I do think there are some fun options. Starting off here with the Steelers, though, they are averaging the 5th most points per game at the defense position. You look at this New York Giants offense, they're struggling. They have the fewest implied points this week, and defenses going up against the Giants have scored the 6th most fantasy points per game. So Steelers, very strong fantasy defense, going up against a very weak offense. That's the perfect combination, like the Steelers here in tier 1. Also in tier 1, I have the Broncos going up against the Panthers. The Broncos are the number 2 defense in points per game. Panthers have a pretty low 18 implied points, and this Broncos defense has allowed over 20 points once in the last 6 games, so they've been productive. Panthers do have a little bit more upside with Andy Dalton at quarterback, but they're also definitely available for a clunker, just like we saw this past week. Then also in tier 1, going to go with the Chiefs going up against the Raiders. Teams going up against the Raiders have scored the most fantasy points per game. The Raiders have the 3rd fewest implied points this week. And you look at the Chiefs defense, they haven't necessarily been a great option fantasy-wise because they're not forcing a lot of turnovers. But teams going up against them are averaging the 5th fewest points per game. So they're going to keep the score low. And I do think this is a matchup here against the Raiders where they can force a few turnovers. And then the final tier 1 defense is going to be the Chargers going up against the Saints. The Saints offense is still banged up. They could be getting Chris Olave, Taysom Hill back, but Derek Carr likely going to miss this game. Spencer Rattler hasn't been super scary if you're playing a defense against him. The Saints have the 2nd fewest implied points this week, and the Chargers have actually allowed the fewest points per game to opposing offenses this season. So they've shut down some decent units. Saints, I don't think are going to be super productive. After those first 2 weeks where they dropped 40 both games, the offense has really just fallen off a cliff. So I think the Chargers are also a very, very strong play. Now, moving out of tier 1 into tier 2, we're going to start off this tier with the Lions going up against the Titans. I feel like tier 1 was a nice combination of really strong defenses going up against poor offenses. Tier 2, maybe the matchup isn't great, or maybe the defenses aren't top tier, but they're still solid plays. So for the Lions here, defenses going up against the Titans have scored the 2nd most fantasy points per game. The Titans have the 6th fewest implied points this week. When we look at the Lions, I was a little bit concerned about them last week losing Aiden Hutchinson, and I still think that's a concern rest of season, but they still had a decent fantasy day against the Vikings. They had 4 sacks. They picked off Sam Darnold, so pretty decent fantasy day without their best defender. I think this is a nice matchup here against the Titans. Even if it's not Will Levis, this is just an offense with a very, very low weekly ceiling. So I think the Lions are a strong play, even if they're not a completely shutdown defense. Then we have the Ravens going up against the Browns. Pretty similar, argument here. Don't think the Ravens are lights out. They can give up a lot of points to some decent teams, but teams going up against the Browns have scored the 3rd most fantasy points per game. The Browns have the 3rd fewest implied points. I will say, though, if the Browns are going to roll with Jameis Winston, it does make this offense a little bit riskier. Now, Jameis could go out, throw 3 picks, and the Ravens could be a great play, but Jameis at least also has the upside of just, randomly popping off and having a monster passing day. So I don't think it's quite as strong of a matchup as it would have been with Deshaun Watson, but I still think it's a solid play. And Jameis can put up numbers and still put up turnovers, so I still like the Ravens here, but just not quite as much as I would have if Deshaun Watson was healthy. Also in tier 2, going to go with the Vikings going up against the Rams. This is really not about the matchup. I think the Rams getting Cooper Kupp back, they're going to be a fine offense. This is really just buying into this Vikings defense. They are 1st in fantasy points per game. They are leading all defenses in interceptions and defensive touchdowns, and then they're 3rd in sacks. So they're getting to the quarterback, they're forcing turnovers, they're getting into the end zone. Even in a not so great matchup, I still think they're a very strong play. And then the final team here in tier 2, it's going to be the Jets taking on the Patriots. Now, this Jets defense has struggled a little bit. Over the past 3 games, they've allowed 23 points or more. That Steelers game, that was kind of just got away from them. That was not great. The other 2, though, they're going up against some decent offenses. It's not like they're getting lit up by bottom of the barrel units. You look at this Patriots team, I do think Drake May is definitely an upgrade. He gives them a much higher weekly ceiling and probably floor, but I still don't think this is a great offense. They have the 5th fewest implied points. I think the Jets are a fine play this week. Now we're going to have 2 teams in tier 3. The first one is going to be the Packers going up against the Jaguars. This is a very good Packers fantasy defense. 4th in points per game. They are 1st in fumble recoveries. They are 3rd in interceptions. And they're coming off a game where maybe it wasn't the best fantasy day. They did allow Joe Mixon to have a big day on the ground, but they held CJ Stroud to 10 completions and under 100 passing yards. That is insanely impressive. This Jaguars offense has been looking better. Trevor Lawrence, that Brian Thomas Jr. connection has been nice, but I still think this is a step up in defense here against the Packers, and I think they're a fine back end play. And then we have the 49ers also in tier 3 going up against the Cowboys. 49ers have been a very solid fantasy defense, 5th in points per game. They're going up against the Cowboys offense that has struggled. Defenses going up against the Cowboys have scored the 10th most points per game. I will say, coming out of the bye week, I don't think the Cowboys are going to look quite as bad as they have early on in the season. You still have Dak, you have CeeDee Lamb. There are some weapons there, but they've definitely been underwhelming. 49ers, a very strong defense. I think they're a nice play. And then the final tier here, tier 4, going to start off with the Texans going up against the Colts. This is kind of like a lukewarm play, I guess. The Texans have been an average fantasy defense. They're 15th in points per game. The Colts, I think, are a somewhat favorable matchup. The Colts offense has scored the 8th fewest points per game on the season. I also think with Richardson, they definitely have a much lower floor, more prone to turnovers. I think the Texans can kind of take advantage of that. So I think the Texans are interesting. And then the final team here, kind of tough to gauge where they're actually going to be ranked because of an injury, but it's the Bears going up against the Commanders. So we're just not quite sure at this point whether Jaden Daniels is going to play. It would be fun to see him go up against Caleb Williams, number 1, number 2 pick, dealing with a rib injury listed as week to week. He could play. He might be out. Obviously, if Jaden Daniels is out, that's a massive upgrade for this Bears defense. They're 3rd in points per game. But you look at the Commanders' offense, and when they're led by Jaden Daniels, defenses going up against them have put up the 2nd fewest points per game. I think they're under 2 points per game defenses going up against the Commanders. So the Bears are definitely a sketchy play if Daniels is healthy. I think they're a pretty strong play if Daniels is out. I know Mariota came in, played well against the Panthers, but going from the Panthers defense to the Bears defense is a pretty extreme difference. But that's going to wrap it up here for my top 12. Would love to hear your thoughts. Any questions, drop them down below. Like I said, running backs, wide receivers, those rankings were posted earlier today. I'll have the quarterbacks and tight ends out tomorrow. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.